Welcome to The Tax Factor, the UK's top tax podcast from Blick Rothenberg, the tax, accounting and business advisory firm. This week with Nimesh Shah and Martin Reynard.
Hello and welcome to The Tax Factor, the UK's leading tax podcast, where we unpack what's going on in the world of tax and why it matters to you. I'm Nimesh Shah, CEO of Blick Rothenberg. I hope everyone had a great bank holiday. It's been anything but quiet in the world of tax, and our President Trump is the gift that keeps giving. And he's stunned the film industry this week with a surprise 100% announcement on tariffs. Yes, you've guessed it. And the UK-India trade deal has reignited the debate over national insurance rules. And of course, the big question, could the local election results push Rachel Reeves to rethink her tax policy? I'm not so sure it will because of our very stubborn Chancellor, but maybe that's a topic for another week. But this week, we're doing things a little bit differently. It's one of our occasional special editions, and we're diving into everyone's favourite subject, pensions. Well, maybe not everyone's, but certainly pensions hero Martin Reynard. He's been immersed in pensions for the last 30 years. So I wheeled out Martin, and today he is here to share his expert insights. Martin, big warm welcome back to the Tax Factor.
Thank you, Nimesh. That's very kind.
Martin, your specialist subject is pensions. You are the hero of pensions, so start us off with celebrating the great pensions mystery. Why is the pension so great, Martin?
Tax breaks, Nimesh, always have been and hopefully always will be. These are well rehearsed, but worth a quick recap. You will save income tax, so your highest marginal rate on contributions, and structured the right way. You can also expect to save on national insurance contributions. Pension funds themselves grow virtually free of tax, and it remains the case that come retirement, there's the ability to take up to 25% of the pension fund as a lump sum free of tax. It's always been that case, I think. I first joined Norwich Union, as was, back in 1985, and my very first job was to be locked in a room with boxes which held thousands upon thousands of personal pension policy documents. Beige they were, as I remember, in colour. And it was my job to check them and send them out. And apparently that had come on the back of a budget in the previous month, and everyone panicked piling money into pensions because they thought there was going to be tax-free cash was going to be removed and there'd be a reduction in tax relief on contributions. It didn't happen then, and it's not happened since. So long may that continue. And you get those tax breaks, of course, as an incentive to save for retirement. Similar combination of tax reliefs perhaps only comes in other fields where it's a reward for taking substantial investment risk. And you're not expected to do that with pensions. You don't have to take any more investment risk than you are comfortable with. And it's not very difficult to get a pension. Indeed, anyone who is an employee on joining employment will find themselves handed one on a plate. And that's the benefit of auto-enrolment, which has been one of the more attractive developments, I have to say, that I've seen in my career.
So you've sold the pensions dream there very quickly in a few minutes, Martin, but it's safe to say you're probably a bit biased as a pensions expert, having worked in the field for so long as well. But pensions have had a bit of a bad rep over, I'd say, the last 6 months, certainly, with some government changes and lots of worry about inheritance tax. More on that later as we come along. But my experience of pensions, having worked in tax for over 20 years, is, God, there's been a huge amount of change almost annually. And it's been really difficult, again, as a non-pensions expert, to try and keep up with all that change. And we need to rely on good people like yourself. But God, Martin, I bet you've seen over your time in practice lots of changes, which has kept you in a job and gainful employment for so long. But talk us through, Martin, some of the best and worst changes in your time working in pensions. Let's start off with some good news. Good news and good changes on pensions that you've seen over the years.
Oh, for sure. I mean, it's a very different world these days. I mean, the changes have certainly been, in my opinion, very much for the better in terms of the individual themselves. I mean, you're right to point out it's certainly not done my career any harm, that every change comes with complexity, and a complexity I've chosen to understand and then hopefully explain back to those who seek my advice. But no, back in the day, you didn't necessarily have a statutory right to an employer's pension on leaving service unless you'd been in employment with that company for 5 years and indeed reach the age of 26, which seems a little alien now in terms of age discrimination. We've certainly come a long way from there. Indeed, we find that personal pension plans are very much used as the basis these days for the vast majority of employer-funded pension arrangements. And of course, once any contribution's paid into a personal pension plan, that's it. It's in there. It ain't coming out again until you're ready to take it at retirement. We've also seen a good deal of improved security around pensions, particularly in the 1990s. Granted, it took Robert Maxwell to fall off a boat in 1991 to expose the gaping hole in the Mirror Group newspaper pension fund. But since then, great strides have been made. And these days, all types of pensions are very closely monitored and regulated, with very much the security of the members concerned. We've seen a great deal of increase in choice around, for example, the ability to transfer from one pension fund unhindered to another, a wide and substantial increase in investment choice. Again, when I first started working, it was a thing called with profits. That's what you found your money in, which was a vague assurance of a nominal value of pension fund at age 60 or 65, which was very nice, but terribly difficult to get your head around or indeed plan for or use in your 40s and 50s. As much as anything, I think the big move has been the reduction in charges that are levied against pension funds, and that's very much for the better. That industry has very much moved away from its advisors being remunerated by substantial commissions, which of course only ever came out of your pension funds. We've moved away from that. Indeed, pension plans are simply available now at factory gate prices, so to speak, without the need to take advice. If you want to take advice, then that can be paid through the pension plan, but you're certainly no under obligation and don't need to incur advisory costs in those charges. We've seen the end of the expectation and compulsion to use your pension fund to buy an annuity or guaranteed income in retirement. And since 2015, under so-called pension freedoms, you're very much in a position, to be honest. You can take, as long as you're old enough, you can take what you like, when you like from a pension fund, make it last, spend it all. The choice is entirely up to you. The flip side of that, very much for the worse, is of course, on the back of those flexibilities, some people were badly advised, particularly in the 1990s, in terms of opting out of well-funded employer pension funds, sometimes giving up substantial guarantees under those pension schemes in order to transfer the money across to a personal pension plan. And that very much seemed, at that period, very much led to a reduction, very much destroyed individuals' confidence in the pension system. I think we've recovered from those days, I'm pleased to say. I am in the David Brent movie, Life on the Road. What amused me back in the days, he was saying, yes, he did have a pension plan, and he was very pleased to report that after a good run, it was now almost worth as much as he'd put into it. Well, I hope we've advanced from those days, Nimesh. Otherwise, I think it's been good news, but I have to say, and you mentioned it already, I have to say, just at the final hurdle in my career, I do think this bringing in inheritance tax on pension funds is a move for the worst.
Well, let's just unpack some of that for a moment, Martin. And I assume it wasn't you that advised David Brent as well. But I remember in that film, because I did watch it recently, that he did take out most of his pension fund to go and pay for his album and road tour when he was showcasing his life on the road, as you said. But touching on pensions freedoms, which is probably the most dramatic change I've seen in pensions in recent time, wild stories of people who are looking to buy Ferraris and Lamborghinis as well as record their own album. But at the same time, the government made this change on inheritance tax as well. And so you have this interesting dichotomy on pensions, I found, where pensioners were encouraged to take out their money because they had all this flexibility. You didn't need to buy an annuity anymore. But you also had this added advantage that the pension could be used as a very inheritance tax efficient tool to pass down to the generations because it was taken out of IHT. And I'm not sure if the government actually yielded the tax revenue that they thought they would do with pensioners going off and buying Ferraris, Lamborghinis and recording their own albums. But roll forward about 10 years now away, and we've got this big furore around inheritance tax, which I think has been compounded by the wider inheritance tax regime and changes to farms and family businesses. I think pensions have been caught up in some of that, which is why I said that pensions maybe have had a bad rep more recently, but you've definitely touched on some really, really good changes to pensions by the government over the last couple of decades. But the inheritance tax is a bit of the straw that's broke the camel back, as I can see. And real outrage from people who are coming up to retirement or people who have used pensions as that IHT planning tool, which I'm not going to make any friends here by saying that I'm not sure that was always the intention of the government to use them as inheritance tax tools, but that is what has happened. But Martin, you're going to be long retired come 2027, and I'm sure you're rubbing your hands saying, thank God for this, but what a mess that the government have created with the change to the lifetime allowance, removing the cap, and now we're in inheritance tax for pensions from 2027 and how this is all going to interlink. I know we haven't got all the detail yet, and we're not going to have enough time, Martin, for you to hypothesize as much as I'm sure you want to. But what do you think is going to happen in 2027 or the run up to 2027 for the government to introduce this much maligned change on inheritance tax for pensions?
I think inheritance tax to be levied on pension funds is going to happen. And I can identify with the government's view that these pensions were and those tax breaks I mentioned, but pensions are about you providing for yourself an immediate dependence in your retirement. They are not an inheritance tax planning vehicle. Now, both you and I in our careers will have advised any number of clients to use pensions or leave pensions untouched for a while because they have that benefit. Now, this concept that your pension fund is for the kids and it's inheritance tax free, well, it's I'm afraid the government's rumbled you and it's not having it. My concern and what I hope will yet be addressed, and I know there have been many representations about this, is it's far too much of a sweeping application to just levy inheritance tax regardless. It's one thing to use it to address those deliberately sitting on pension funds and leaving them unused deliberately as a inheritance tax favoured vehicle. But the proposals will catch those much, much younger, those who are in the working phase of their career, who have young family, who that family's relying on that income, and there will be mortgage and other heavy, sort of midlife expenses. And you're bringing those people you're bringing them into inheritance tax for the first time because you're making them apparently much more wealthier than inheritance tax was designed to perhaps address. And you're simply removing 40% of the value of any funds that might have been available. And I would hope that is looked at either to use a minimum age at which unused pension funds might be deemed to be unused. Someone dying in their 40s doesn't really have unused pension funds if they didn't otherwise have the opportunity to use them. I mean, that just seems a strange concept to me. So I hope that is touched, or indeed some kind of allowance is available where up to a point pension funds are exempt from tax. And in fact, the so-called lump sum and death benefit allowance, which is now entrenched in legislation, will be very much fit for purpose for that. It would allow £1 million in pension funds to be passed on.
Well, I hope that the Chancellor, the Treasury are listening to your wise words, Martin. It's unlikely that they will probably make any of those very, very sensible changes. And it'll be interesting to see when we do get the detail on how inheritance tax is going to practically operate for pensions, what that mechanism is going to look like, and how actually people need to then start planning for this, because it has been 10 years where people have been on a certain journey with pensions as part of the overall toolkit for tax planning that you've talked about, the benefits of contributing and getting that tax-free growth, but also that inheritance tax advantage that we've had. But I suppose I balance that by saying, actually, it wasn't that long ago when pensions were in the scope of inheritance tax. I just think that the mess that we've created through various legislative changes, some of those, dare I say, are politically driven. We've ended up with a very, very complicated system, which is a shame, really, with all the good things that you've said, Martin, about why we should celebrate the pension. I think, as I said before, the PR of pensions has been unfortunately damaged, and I think it's the role of us as advisors and the wider finance community to make sure that people do continue to use the pension in the way that it should be intended and take those tax breaks. And if I could admit my secret here, which is one of my biggest own tax planning regrets in my time, is that I didn't start contributing to my pension until my 30s. And I missed out on additional employer contributions from my very first job. And I've tried to right that wrong in more recent years by trying to over-contribute where I can. And I'm also trying to pass on pearls of wisdom to my 2-year-old daughter, because one of the first things I did, which you know, Martin, was to set up a stakeholder pension for her the day after she was born, much to the disdain of my wife, whilst the baby was crying in the corner. So I hope my daughter will have a much more successful pensions journey than I ever will. And on that note, we are almost out of time, but it would be remiss of me not to acknowledge the fantastic knowledge that you've built up, Martin, over the last 30 years. And there is a reason that we asked Martin to join the Tax Factor podcast today, because you are in fact retiring tomorrow. Martin's been with Blick Rothenberg an incredibly long time and a stalwart to lots of people internally, past and present at Blick Rothenberg, but the thousands of clients that you've helped with your advice and support, navigating clients through those complexities. And we've not even touched on some of the international cross-border aspects of the work that you've done. But outside of the brilliant pensions advice that you've given over so many years, Martin, you are one of the nicest people I have ever met. And it is very clear to me, just from this very short podcast, but also having worked with you for the last 12 years or so, that you've also been following your own pensions advice. And I suppose I wish, if I could go back in time, I wish I had a Martin Reynard in my life in my early 20s who told me to go and invest more in my pension. So I'm sure, Martin, you're off to go and buy your Ferrari or Lamborghini, or maybe you're off to record your own album, or even treat yourself to a trip to the Bahamas. But before we switch off this podcast, and sadly, but also celebrating the career of the great Martin Reynard and all the pensions advice you've given, what are your last bits of advice, and what have you done as a real-life case study to plan for your retirement?
I think that my advice to you would be either to be or to marry a pension advisor, and either to be or to marry an accountant. If you fail on that, then there are plenty of professionals out there. And I'd strongly recommend that perhaps turning age 50 is when you seriously start to take a look at how these numbers are going to play out. What have you got? Where's it heading in terms of contributions? What are the opportunities? Are you making the most of the employer contributions and what have you? What more should you be doing to save? Not necessarily to pensions either, but, you need to buy into the idea of building up some kind of future war chest. And then understanding what's inelegantly known as the decumulation phase. When you stop working, when the income stops coming in, you start drawing on this war chest. What are the numbers behind that? And understand what it is you spend your money on, what it is you're going to have to keep buying, what it is you can do without, what are the nice to haves, what are the luxuries. By all means, do that yourself. But I'd recommend an advisor. For what it's worth, I've got myself this far, but come next week, no, I've already got my own financial advisor in place, and to be honest, they can run with this stuff for me. I'd happily hand that side of things over to others. But from my point of view, I think we're good. We don't know what can happen in the next, hopefully 20 years or so that me and my wife have got. But the numbers are looking okay. So we set off with some confidence that, we're okay for now.
And thank you, Martin. I am sure with all that sound advice and the support that you're going to get from your financial advisor, I'm sure you will be more than okay. And it's my opportunity to wish you all the best for a very enjoyable retirement. Enjoy your time in the garden or enjoy your time in the Bahamas. You absolutely deserve it, Martin. I'm sure that I speak for all those hundreds of thousands of clients that you've helped over the years who are also celebrating their retirement and giving you a toast on the beach for that wonderful advice that you've given. So for this very special episode of The Tax Factor, I'll leave the last word to Martin.
Thank you. Well, after nearly 40 years helping others plan for their retirement, it is finally my turn. So take care, plan well, and goodbye.
That's the Tax Factor. If you enjoyed the Tax Factor, please like, share and subscribe. Join us again next time on the UK's top tax podcast, The Tax Factor. The Tax Factor is a Blick Rothenberg production. Copyright 2025.